Welcome back. This is the Wood Knight Weekly shop update, and amazingly I'm actually keeping to that weekly schedule. Last week was quite an unproductive week. First migraines, followed by doctor's appointments two days in a row, just check-up type things, but as you would all know, doctor's appointments, specialist appointments are never short appointments. Then started a very simple quick fun project that just didn't turn out right, so I eventually had to scrap that project. I was making a claptrap from the Borderlands series of games, and unfortunately it just didn't work out. I got to a point where something just wasn't gelling right, and I kind of had to scrap the project and get on with more productive stuff. This week may be sort of similar, though I'm still working on the hexes, so nothing really to reveal there. My new sander has not yet arrived, but I wanted to cover something I'm just about to do, which is pulling apart a cabinet that my dad made a good 20 years or so ago. So this is a little bit tricky to get in frame, but this is a cabinet my dad built out of Jarrah. It's almost entirely Jarrah, so it is very, very heavy. This is for the old tube TV type things, so CRT TVs. Fit a 60 centimetre TV. So it's a 4:3 ratio, so that's why it's so square. I've talked about my dad before, and he was perhaps a prototype maker, or what we know as a maker today is what Dad was without having a label. He wasn't a woodworker, he wasn't a metal worker, he was a bit of everything. He'd try his hand at anything and everything. Sometimes it would work out well, and sometimes it would not. Much like today's maker, Dad didn't necessarily have expertise in any one subject. Never stopped him from trying, but unlike today's maker, he didn't have access to YouTube, didn't have access to so many more sources of information on the internet freely available. So there were certainly some things that he just didn't know about, and it came back to bite him in one way or another. Now, one example of what I mean is wood movement. A lot of people think this doesn't exist, but it certainly does, and it's something my dad just didn't know about based on the construction of this. And as a good example, you generally shouldn't be able to put a ruler through a panel glue up. I'll give a very quick tour of this before I continue pulling it apart. It's been in the family for a while, but we don't have a use for it. No one's got a use for it, so Mum kind of just wants it broken down into the timber, and maybe we can find a use for the timber at least. Up the top, I'm pretty sure we had either a VCR or DVD player later on. So we'd have this little stay here that would keep it all together or open so it wouldn't smack down into the TV. The amp may have gone there or down below, I can't really remember. There was a back on this, but I've taken that off. It's just a 3mm piece of MDF screwed onto the back. Cabinet this size doesn't really need it given the rest of the construction. There were two doors. I've taken one off for moving it. They are LED light panels, glass LED light stuff, and the TV was in here, big CRT TV. The neat thing about these doors is they slide out of the way. So this mechanism is pretty interesting. It is called a pocket door or a sliding pivot door. I really quite like the mechanism. It's not, I don't know whether this particular mechanism is a bit dodgy or whether it was the way that Dad put stuff together that over time has sort of grounded away. I'll find out. I'll make a mock-up door at some stage and try it out, because I'd love to use that mechanism for something, because I think it's really cool. So I'll show that mechanism again so you can actually see how it works. You've got normal hinges here. These are bloom, the whole mechanism is a bloom mechanism, but Hafel and Het each make some as well. Normal concealed hinges, cup hinges, and then that just slides away. It's really quite neat. I think that this should have been a slightly longer mechanism. I don't think he matched that to the right size cabinet, but this could have been all he could find. Either way, it didn't actually affect viewing angles on the TV, so it worked just fine. Where the TV rested here is solid Jarrah as well, and that would be about 16mm thick, which is consistent with the entire outside. can also see here there's another split there, another issue with wood movement where the panel wasn't allowed to float and eventually cracked. Below where the TV used to go is another one of these shelves with the door. This was, as I said, either the amp or the VCR DVD player. Very solid. And finally we've got this drawer. Now the drawer is Jarrah on the front, but the actual drawer carcass itself is all MDF. As you can see, the drawer is all MDF with inserts for CDs. Thing is, the drawer itself weighs in at 16 kilos, and the drawer runners aren't full extension drawer slides, they're the old keyboard drawer slides, whatever they used to call them. This little tray has the same drawer slides, but this is made out of pine and MDF, so it's a fair bit lighter. Problem with this big drawer is when this was loaded up with, well, anything, it's too much for those drawer slides and everything would creak and crack and be very difficult to open. So I talked about this violating wood movement rules, and this is one of the key examples of where that actually happens. So this is the sliding mechanism for the doors, and above it is a shelf support for, well, the shelf above it, the one with the funny door. So that's where the amp or VCR went. This is that shelf support. This is both screwed and glued onto 2 or 3 of the panels that make up the side panel. This is solid wood. This is solid wood. The grains are going in opposite directions. This is restricting this wood from being able to expand and contract along the length of the grain, sorry, the width of the grain, and that means along these seams here where the glue was, it's just burst open. Now that actually could have been a lot worse. It did break on the glue line or right next to it. The glue typically is very, very hard. You know, the old saying that it's harder than the surrounding wood. That's true. That means next to it is a bit less flexible. That tends to be where it cracks. So I don't know if that's right on the glue line or right next to it, but regardless, that's where it's cracked on all the pieces. Another spot that Dad got wrong were the drawer fronts, or the door fronts, or whatever you want to call these. This is off that big drawer down the bottom. Now, this is quite a large door, and you'd think frame and panel door, that's fine, right? Unfortunately, this is not really a frame and panel door. It's a frame with a rebated panel that is glued into that rebate. And again, we can see a crack. Oh, it's actually a bit easier to see on this side. Down the middle here, that's where it's cracked because, again, no way for that panel to move. So the correct way to do that, if you're wondering, would be to have a much thinner panel or have a tenon all the way around the panel in a dado groove and have it so that it was just floating loose. This is the piece I ended up cutting off. You can see that there's a single dowel. See oodles of glue in that rebate, hopefully. So nowhere for that panel to go. It is interesting how dark this Jarrah is. So I've planed off with a low angle jack all the finish. And it's still really quite dark for unfinished Jarrah. It's one of the interesting things about Jarrah. It has a huge range of colours from dark chocolatey browns to purples to reds. On the outside here we see the same violation on the actual frame of the cabinet. These rails are glued into the side panels as well as into here. So this is very, very secure, but also going to cause those issues where this panel here can't move. So lots of reasons why Dad made those mistakes. The first is he just didn't know about it. Without access to the internet, you'd have to go to a library, you'd have to go to a school, you'd have to go to some sort of class to learn these types of things. While he did have access to the internet, this type of information wasn't really available 20 years ago. At least not in the same manner it is now, where there are so many good examples out there. Another reason is Dad just didn't have the tools, specifically the machinery. By that I mean didn't have a bandsaw to resaw those Jarrah panels, didn't have a thicknesser to bring them down, and you probably wouldn't bring a 16mm panel down to probably 6mm. It's a little bit wasteful if you're just having a thicknesser, just using a thicknesser. It's interesting, this was something that Dad designed himself, and it's not to my style, my taste, but I can certainly appreciate that. And it's a little bit of a shame that I don't really have his eye for a design, but I do have the technical side of it, so I could have built his designs better, if that makes sense. Despite the construction issues, it is actually a very sturdy piece of furniture, so it's probably going to take me all week to knock it down. I don't know what we're going to do with it yet. I've got a few ideas of what I could do with that type of material, but it's still probably more Mum's call on that, and they're just ideas that I could use any timber for at this stage. We'll do a mock-up of the pocket door hardware, because I think that's really cool. I do have an idea for a cabinet using that, but I do need to see whether that particular bracket is good, bad, or otherwise. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching.